I basically was on offense. So after, well, 26 years, I led the DoD Red Team for 1993 when first been internet access on Navy ships, and then ran network operation security centers. So I've been offense for a long time. And the thing with offense is we love it. Everybody loves offense and pen testing because all we got to do is find one way in and we win. So what I started out setting to do, and it's actually started in 2012 with the London Olympics, is when we started thinking of the concepts. How could we try to flip that model? And what we'll cover here in the presentation is some of the concepts we've come up with of deception. So I'm in the last chapter trying to get it to the publisher to write a new book, and the book is Defense and Deception, Confuse and Frustrate the Attackers. And I'll talk more about that concept, and it's amazing how easy it is to deploy and set this up. And we already have all the monitoring in place anyway. Since we have the monitoring in place, all we got to do is put in specific rule sets. So hopefully, time permitting, I usually kind of go long on these things, but hopefully not. Time permitting, I'll be able to show a quick little demo of how easy it is to set up. So let's talk a little bit about the concepts of what I'm talking about here. Mainly that's me. I'm not going to go into any more of me. The one thing I'll talk about there is I've worked for UMUC 18 years as faculty and also UCLA Extension for 5 years, going on 6 now. And there's some information. And you got the internet, so you can search the internet. So let's talk more about the attack data. We're losing the race. I think everybody on this call probably knows we're losing the race. Some say we already lost it. And then the concepts of deception and some of the techniques we used and deployed, and we've had a huge amount of success with. And we flipped that model. We always say the attackers are in control. They only need to find one way in. And we know that's true, and we can't prevent users from clicking, as we'll discuss, and things like that. But we can flip that model. And this concept I'm talking about, and it's in the book as well, is how we show you to flip that model to where we're in control. And we're talking about tools of deception. There's some actual commercial products out there that's been released for deception. Now let's look at data breaches. We hear of data breaches all the time. It's frustrating for me because when you read most of the data breaches, the users were tricked. In most cases, the users were tricked when they did the data breach. So it takes trickery and deceit, right? In most cases, there's some exceptions, different types of things, but for the most part, it's interaction with the user. That's why ransomware, all this other type of stuff is so popular, because they found ways to deceive people, and when they click, they give access, right? And that's the next bullet. We can all be tricked. If you don't think you can be tricked, trust me, you can be tricked. Even IT people. I myself have been tricked, right? And remember to be extra vigilant around holidays and disasters, because that's when they send out entire campaigns. This is big business. This is the organized crime of the modern day, is making money through identity theft and ransomware and all those types of things. So yes, everybody can be tricked. So when you look at this Nuremberg University study, it was quite shocking that even though the people they interviewed, and I believe the data set was 10,000, don't remember exactly, they know it's a risk to click, but 78% of the people said they're going to click anyway, because that's the mentality. The mentality is, yeah, there's a possibility something's going to happen, but it might not happen. And this is what I'm seeing with a lot of security people, the CISOs and all that type of stuff. They're trying to tell me, well, yeah, we could be hacked, but yeah, it might take that type of stuff. It's the wrong mentality they have, but they've got away with it for a long time until there's a breach. Until there's a breach, they really don't do that much about it. All right, so that gets a little bit frustrating. So the anatomy of a breach still comes down to credentials. It's all about credentials. When you look at these breaches, the Capital One hack, you look at all these other types of things, all this stuff is because of poor storage of data and not protecting our credentials. Even if you go back to the OPM hack, all these other types of things. So this is what I tell all my clients. There's no way that you can expect your data to be protected if another entity, Capital One was an example, OPM was an example, there's tons of them, right? Equifax, all these other places that were examples. Those credentials are the key. In fact, Microsoft has been on a movement for a while to try to come up with other things other than password. Think about it, we're still using password to log into systems. 63% of all the network breaches from 2017 report from Microsoft was all compromise user credentials. So credentials are still the key, right? So we have to make sure we set up multi-factor authentication, right? I mean, come on, this is the modern day. No password should be the sole factor of authentication to anything that is of use, even for your own personal accounts. You should have multi-factor authentication on your personal accounts such that if somebody does compromise your database and get your password, which we know can happen because it's happening for everybody, 1 billion plus accounts with Yahoo, they've got only one factor of your authentication. They've got to get the other one. And that's the mentality we want you to start thinking about. So everybody likes to bring up all this stuff, all these things, but look at this. Once again, from 2017 report, it's all hacking. It's all about hacking. Malware kind of peaked up close to it, and ransomware is kind of probably making a race close to hacking again, but it still involves some form of hacking. And we give credit to Microsoft and other vendors. They've made it harder, so the hackers have found other ways. Of course, we know the user trickery and stuff like that. So the problem is right here. Look at that bullet. It's estimated we spent $80 billion US dollars on cybersecurity products in 2017. Did we have any breaches? Yeah, wanna cry. Ransomware was all during that time. The forecast is for 93 billion in 2018. We're still waiting to see that report to come out because they're kind of afraid to tell everybody what they spent. And all of you listening there, start thinking about how much have you spent on cybersecurity products. And this is the problem. You can't fix this problem with products. If you could fix this problem with products, we all wouldn't be in the situation that we are. A product, don't get me wrong, they help, they assist us with security. They are not going to make us secure. And that's the biggest thing we have to understand. We have to put in a full methodology, take our people, give them the process methodology, and then add the products as an assistant. No product can make you secure. The reality check is, as I said, no product makes us secure. All right. And the patch system's broken. Folks, if you think the patches are going to save us, forget it. Think about how many patches we have on the second Tuesday of the month. This has been a bad year. 80 of them in May, 90 plus in June, 78 in July, 97 in August, and 90 in September. These are all Windows patches that have come out since May. There's no way that we can fix this problem by doing patches, because most of you listening, if you receive a new vulnerability alert and you've got to do a patch, you've got to test it. That's why we call the second Wednesday of the month Exploit Wednesday, because as soon as Microsoft releases that patch, we reverse engineer it. Once we reverse engineer it, we find weakness. Once we find weakness, we gain access. And that's the whole goal of the attacker's mindset. All they're trying to do is get that access. And sometimes they need help. And that's why social engineering is such a popular attack vector, and other mechanisms that get the users trickery, trick and deceit. And then we've gotten so much better at security that hackers decided what? Let's go look at hardware chips. So they came up with Spectre, they came up with Meltdown, Foreshadow. So now it's bad enough that we had to secure our software, but what about the hardware chips? This is the problem. We can't rely on this model anymore. We need something different. And this is from Semantics report for 2019, from 2018. 1 in 10 of every URL on the internet is malicious. Web attacks increased 56% in 2018, even though we know everybody started talking about we had all these cool web application firewalls and all these other products, right? 48% of your attachments, it went up from 5%, were Office files, right? 65% used phishing. So we're still looking at spear phishing and phishing as the attack vector. Mobile ransomware increased 33%. All these are things that are a concern. And 4,800 websites compromised a month. And think about it, almost everybody out there uses their phone and access these web page. That's still a client-server relationship. How well do they protect their phone? Not very well, which is why ransomware and all that stuff keeps the spread. All right, Office files, as we said. All right, smaller organizations were the ones that were hit. Remember the concept? Most people saying that, oh, I don't have to worry about it, we're too small. Well, that doesn't apply anymore. They're hitting small organizations as well. And spear phishing, once again, is the main vector of attack. So not only did Symantec say it, Trustwave said it as well. And then that's the scary part. Symantec blocked more than 10,000 malicious mobile apps per day on their sites around the internet that tracks apps. So think about that next time you're using an app on your phone. And then this was the scary part. Microsoft, they've done a great job, started helping secure, but then they gave us PowerShell. And PowerShell has caused all kinds of problems and weaknesses. So we saw a greater than 1,000% increase in malicious PowerShell scripts, because PowerShell has a lot of control of the system. So these are all problems because all it takes is that user to click. Once that user clicks, have what we call the dropper. The dropper drops on the machine and it pretty much is game over. All right. Then Trustwave. Phishing, 46% of 2018, all the actual internal network compromises that Trustwave investigated were phishing attacks, right? 60% of the point of sale transactions and cloud compromises were phishing attacks. So I know everybody listening and say, well, don't click. Well, yeah, I wish we would figure out a way to stop people from clicking. We've always wanted that. And utilities wasn't even attacked in 2016 and 2017, but we had 7% of the attacks and incidents against utility companies. So this is the thing. We connected things to the network that should never be there. If you've got a doorbell connected to the network, anything you got to the network's a target. Just understand you got to protect it with some type of authentication. Make sure you change the passwords and those types of things. Most people don't, hence we had the Mirai botnet. All right, 38%, of course, more Microsoft Office. They saw the same thing. We all got used to understanding malicious attachments, and we kind of forgot about macros. Well, the hackers figured out macros are working again, so now they send a bunch of Office documents with macros in it embedded. And then there's the hardware attacks. As I said, Meltdown, Spectre, and Foreshadow. These are all hardware attacks. So since they're hardware attacks, hard to protect from. And then the malware samples, still using obfuscation, that one on the left-hand side, the 67% obfuscation to avoid detection. The reality is 67% obfuscation means they're changing it in some form. Well, why are they changing it? They're changing it so that we don't detect it with all these products. That's why the products can't make us secure. We got the 80-20 rule. 80% they'll detect, but they miss 20, and that's our best products. So these are all the types of problems we're having with the existing security, the way we think of it today. And then application security. Trustwave, first in 2016's data, we were at 97.4%. And in 2017, we hit 100%. In 2018, the report for 2019, guess what? We hit 100% again. That means Trustwave, every application they tested had at least one vulnerability. 9% of these vulnerabilities were high risk or critical. So these are all things you have to be concerned with when you're trying to protect your organizations. And that's why we've got to think of a different way. It's time to think out of the box as a defender. So the data, this is the thing. What do you hear all the time? Just give up. Hackers are too good. Assume breach, right? All those types of things, right? You hear it all the time. Assume breach. The reality is, how about secure ID source code compromise? That was a link, that was an attachment. How's that a sophisticated attack? And I won't go into all the details of that for the time, but the only thing I'll say is, why is it on a public network? Okay, yeah, they targeted the people who wrote the secure ID source code. Yes, they did do that. So it was a spear phishing attack. But why is that source code available on a public network? Enough said. How about Target, the data breach? They didn't breach Target themselves. They breached an HVAC. The heating, ventilation, and cooling. And once they breached the laptop of the HVAC, they were actually, that laptop was connected into the actual network to log into the HVAC, heating, ventilation, and cooling. And from there, the malware planted onto Target's main network point of sale transaction where they process credit cards. But can anybody tell me why the point of sale transaction network is reachable from the heating, ventilation, and cooling network? I can't tell you. I don't know why. So that's a concern there as well. Anybody know Target spent $1.6 million in software before the breach, right? Those types of things. All those are things that you have to be concerned with, right? When we put internet access to U.S. Navy warships and we went to sea with internet, We didn't put the missile systems on the same network segment as the internet. So I don't know why people do that out in industry. Anyway, moving on. And the WannaCry. The WannaCry is just ridiculous. What I want you to do tonight, if you've got a front door, take and open your front door and leave it open till tomorrow morning and see if anything comes in. Because for WannaCry to work, your network front door, port 445 SMB, server message block, has to be open. So if server message block is open, then yes, you could get an infected machine with WannaCry. If a user clicks that one machine, I call it patient zero when I talk about the process, yes, that's infected. But if you don't allow port 445 outbound, right? Port 445 is Microsoft's NetBIOS port, a local area network port. If you don't allow it outbound, that one machine's infected, but nobody other than that network segment can be infected because you block it with filtering. Now, WannaCry happened in 2017 because the actual Microsoft bulletin for it is called MS-17 for Microsoft. The year 17 is 2017-010. Well, I'll take you back a little bit of history. In 2008, I was speaking at conferences and I was talking about that same analogy. Go home, open your door, leave it open till the next day. So leave it open all night and see if anything comes in. I reported the same thing exactly in 2008 because Microsoft had another epidemic vulnerability in 2008, which was called Microsoft Server Service, a problem in path canonicalization. I won't get into the actual details of it, but that vulnerability was the same vector, or the port, or the way that the attack gets in was the same method, and that was port 445. So here we are 9 years later when WannaCry hit, and we still have people with their front door open. So yeah, that's why they got breached. 10 years, if you look past 10 years and you look at all the breach reports, goes between usually 75% and 90% of these breaches will be blocked by fundamentals of defense with segmentation, isolation, and the rest of it you block them with a technique called black hole routing, control your egress points all from one point, and you block 90% of the malware if you don't allow direct DNS queries to Google, all right? These are all things that you can do to help protect yourself. And then we got APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. All right, yes, there's nation state, there are all those types of things, but once you get your ingress, your egress filter, your segmentation, isolation, the goal is identify them when they're in. And the way I like to explain it is when you're out, say you're in a jungle, you're in the military, you're in a jungle, you can't have a sentry at every point around the perimeter, right? You'd have to put people foot apart all the way around the perimeter or some crazy thing like that. So what did they do? They put tripwires around the perimeter. So if somebody come into the point the sentry wasn't at, it would hit the tripwire. That's what we have to start thinking with, right? But we don't just have the advanced persistent threat. We have the basic persistent threat. The problem is organizations are worried about the advanced persistent threat, or the APT, but they haven't done the fundamentals: ingress filtering, egress filtering, segmentation, isolation, those types of things. Sorry, folks, if you get hit with ransomware and it breaches more than one network segment, you have poor network segmentation and isolation, right? Network segmentation and isolation. If you're using VLANs and the VLANs can talk to more than one VLAN, that's poor VLAN isolation. All these are problems. Anytime you hear in the news ransomware taking out an entire network, an entire city, the 2 cities in Florida, the city Baltimore, all those types of things, that's poor network design. It goes all the way back to, like I said, we didn't put missile systems on the same segment of the internet. So why are people doing that today? I don't know. And then we have the other technique of the threat that I hate, the vendor persistent threat. Yes, vendors will go out there and say they know cybersecurity, and you'll look at the network design, and I'll use a phrase from Bruce Snyder years ago that he called Microsoft's MS Chat V1 kindergarten crypto. Well, that's kindergarten network design. They don't have any foundation of segmentation isolation. And here's examples of that. So I went on a site, did an incident, and guess what? The vendor installed the firewall backwards. It was protecting the internet and not the site. That was a vendor did that, and they paid for it. A VPN gateway. Once had a VPN gateway in the military sent out and set up word plug and play. The famous words, oh, it's just going to be plug and play. Plug it in and it works. Well, guess what? They installed it, the government contract, paid a lot of money, the government contract did. They put all the devices in with the default passwords. And that's the VPN gateway. Facing the internet, supposed to be protecting the data and be encrypted, and it had default passwords. So all you had to do is log in and actually look at the data in decrypted state. Then a DC area company I was doing a pen test with, doing all this cool stuff. And guess what? The wireless access point was terminated inside the firewall. And they paid for that. They paid a company to come in and put in a wireless access point and terminate it inside the firewall. Go look up TJX Corporation or TJX Corporation, which is TJ Maxx and TK Maxx in Europe. Go look up that breach. That's where the first initial wireless router was outside, and then from that router they got inside the firewall because it was terminated inside the firewall. Them are basic things, very basic. All right, the race. Yeah, we're losing. Some say we lost, but we're losing. Why are we losing? Because we're doing the wrong thing. We're buying all these cybersecurity products, and we've proven we can't prevent users from clicking. We've got to have a different mindset. The concept has always been to keep them out. How well has that worked? It hasn't worked. We've tried it over and over again, and we can't keep them out because the user's going to click. All right? All right. We have to get smarter. How do we get smarter? Let them in. I know everybody's freaking out. Let them in. Have obstacles, of course. We already got that. We've done tons of stuff like this already. We can't keep them out 100%. We've tried. Long as we identify when they're in and isolate and destroy them and interrupt their access, it's a win for defense. That's what we did in the London Olympics 2012. That's what we do at LAX. That's what we do at Phoenix Sky Harbor, and we do at Warner Brothers, a lot of other places. Same concept. We put all these different things in our networks that I call them ghosts, triggers, whatever you want to call them, to help protect us. Because unless the hacker's on the host machine directly, they have to have a connection. That's our advantage, because that connection is at either layer 3 or layer 4 if they're losing a port. We control this. Do not listen to everybody who tells us that we don't control it. That initial access is via layer 3 and by IP address. I know my network. The hacker doesn't know my network. I've been pen testing for 26 years. First thing we do is recon. We recon the network and figure out the IP address structure, those types of things. Well, that's why I control it as a defender. I know my network. The hacker has to try to figure out my network, right? That's the concept. So what we do is we change what the attacker can see. And the terminology we like to use is called a shapeshift. So once we determine the actual hackers on a segment using the techniques I'm going to talk about momentarily, all we do is we cause confusion, right? An exasperated way of doing it is we kick everybody off of the subnet and reissue IP addresses. So we do DHCP release, renew, kick people off the network, or a better one that we're working on with some engineering teams. We spin up a bunch of false machines in a virtual environment. We call it a holodeck, kind of like Star Trek. It's all fake. And we spin it up there. The hacker's in there being entertained, and we move off to another direction, or at least shift the data. Shift to critical data. So we call that the shape shift. So what happens is it's a disruption. Any disruption's a win for us in defense. And this causes the attacker to start their methodology all over again. That's the power of this. So what do? We got to understand what the network traffic should look like. If you take your network diagram, go to your network engineer, or if you are the network engineer, look at that and know what is inbound, ingress, and egress on every network segment. If you don't know that, you don't know your network well enough, right? So what we do is, once we know this, we start changing our architecture around and shape shifting it, where the hacker says, wait a minute, I was here, now it's saying here, and we do what? We marshal our defenses, because once the hacker, we know they're in, remember, we let them in, as long as we control the point they come into and the route they take, it's a win. That's our goal. So the first thing, of course, is ingress filtering, traffic coming into your network, all right? Most of you are implementing that. Your security policy should determine what's allowed and configured in the filters. As I said, you have to know your network well enough. Ingress, egress, you have to know every point coming in and out of your network, right? No traffic arriving at the perimeter should have an internal source address. Well, that's the easy one. We call that sanity checking. The other one is RFC 2267. There's your guidance for preventing distributed denial of service attacks. Then echo replies. Don't allow echo reply messages to the broadcast address. Basic stuff. None of this should ever work today, but we still find it. That's why we talk about it, because we need to take care of the basic persistent threat, the fundamentals first, and then go from there. Then ball-gone filtering. Now, if you're listening out there and you're the network team and you don't know what ball-gone is, go do research. If you are a supervisor, go to your network engineers, your network team, and ask them about ball-gone filtering. It's simple and easy, where certain IP addresses should never be received as a source. The most common one, of course, is RFC 1918, or private addresses. But also there's a lot of other addresses as well. And this ball-gone filtering is nothing new. We put it on the ships in the 90s when we were doing internet access to Navy, US Navy warships. The reality is right there. The last case study of malware infections, 64% of all the emails that came in, the spam messages, all that type of stuff, 64% of that would have been blocked by ball-gone filtering, all right? Those are the things you have to be aware of. And then egress. This is the one people don't usually do a good job of. Why? Because it's leaving. So since it's leaving, they're like, we don't have to block it, it's leaving, right? We don't have to worry about it. Wrong. It's one of the most important things you want to do, because the egress traffic is how the worm spreads, how the command and control goes, all these other types of things, right? And the problem is everybody has to do it. What's the chance we're ever going to get everybody to do anything on the internet? We're not. So we can only protect and control our stuff. But I got a simple one for you. If you have a server on a segment that's publicly facing the internet, that server should never initiate a connection. If that server initiates a connection, there's something wrong. Servers are designed to receive traffic, not send traffic. So at the perimeter, it's also in the book, in the perimeter, set up a filter. It says TCP flag send set. If it's the source address of any of my servers, and you can set up a network block or an actual variable in like an IDS, stuff like that. If it's the source address of any of my servers, block it and go critical alert, because one of my servers has been breached because data is trying to come out of my server. Remember, servers receive data, not send it. All right. Amplifiers, concept simple, right? Most attacks use a spoofed address. If I'm spoof addressing as it comes up to your perimeter and the source address is not your network, it's spoofed. Sanity checking egress is don't allow any network as a source that's not your actual existing network, and you're done. Game over. Black hole routing. That was what I was telling you a little bit about the DNS. All your DNS queries should come from an internal DNS server. And then the other component of black hole routing is your 80 and 443 traffic, which is your web traffic, should all be proxied from a central point. Any malware or anything does the direct connect to 80 or 443, you identify it, go to alert, because it shouldn't be happening. If it does happening, something's happened on your machine. Now, that's 90% of the attacks. 10% will go and find your proxy and then use your proxy to go out, but at least you've mitigated 90%. And if you got critical infrastructure systems, they should never generate a connection out, right? All things to think about. Of course, they shouldn't be on the internet anyway, but they are. Okay, if your workstation site is not 24/7, shut off access going out to the internet. I know everybody's freaking out right now. Turn the internet off. For those of you for home, turn your wireless router off. If you're going anywhere more than a day, shut it off. Don't leave that thing on. It's just attack surface. The longer it's on, new vulnerability comes out on it, somebody could breach it, right? And always block the well-known malware ports of communication. I got there on the list: HTTP, SSH, HTTPS, etc., right? And then what you do is you monitor it. You monitor any attempts of outbound connections. Remember, if the user clicks, it's going to do the dropper. As soon as it does the dropper, it's going to phone home. So if you're monitoring those attempts outside of working hours, if you're not a 24/7 shop, you can potentially identify the infection. If you are 24/7, remember we said servers should not initiate connections. It's there now. You can even subscribe to a service. Dambala is one of them. There's other ones as well. And monitor your critical systems. Make sure none of your critical systems are talking to anybody. That could be it. Great. And I'm just going to blow through these slides here because this is just a picture of smooth wall. Even this old firewall, smooth wall, this is the incoming network traffic. What's allowed to income? Nothing. Nothing should be allowed to come in. You should actually put in the couple things you need to allow in, and that's it. That's your attack surface. Moreover, that's your risk. And extended beyond that, that's your vulnerability management for an external attack. You only have to manage those vulnerabilities from that attack surface you're displaying to the internet. And this is egress. Now, what they do here is they bind all the actual ports for like web, file transfer, email, news, instant messaging, multimedia. This is just an example, but you have to do the same thing in your organizations. That's why I said all your policies have to be set up segment by segment policies, ingress, egress, only allow in, only allow out the bare minimum of everything you need. And then your secure network architecture, right? So I'm gonna give you an example here. And what I recommend you do is you take your services that are public services that have to go out to the internet and give them their own segment, as I'm showing here in the example. You could put another device or appliance or Bastion host, that we call it there, and run your firewall software if you want before that DMZ that's off of the router by itself. It doesn't matter. That's where you put all your public services. Now what you've done is you've separated your public services from your internal network user data. That's step one. Step two is you put your app servers there. So if an app server is breached, it still cannot get to my internal network. So as soon as that hacker breaches that app server can't initiate a connection. So since that app server can't initiate a connection, it can't send a SYN packet. So if some of you have listened out there, if you've ever done any pen testing, you know when we're in a firewalled environment, we have to use a thing called a reverse shell. You won't be able to reverse shell out of that because I'm not allowing you to generate an actual packet with a SYN flag set. I can put a simple router, Cisco Access Control List, for example, and I can say no packet with the actual TCP SYN flag set allowed out. That's the concept. And then what you do is you put your IDS and that DMZ there, and you only have open on the Bastion host the external interface, usually port 25 for mail or whatever mail port you're using, and then DNS. And you do true segmentation isolation. That's what I'm showing you here, segmentation isolation. But the power is you bind all the ports inside. So when you look at that diagram and you look at that Bastion host, you bound all those ports inside. Once you bind all those ports inside, the attack surface outside is only 2 ports, and that's at 25 and 53 in most cases. Sometimes maybe 1 or 2 more. I had to argue with people on ships all the time because they always want to try to do different things, and I always try to tell them I can't recommend you do that, and it was kind of a discussion back and forth, but you get the idea. But the main thing here is we've separated our services data from our users, and that even helps performance. So now we're just going to cover real quickly. This is how a hacker works. Recon, footprinting, people call it different names. The surveillance, footprint, enumerate, find a vulnerability, exploit the vulnerability, and then hide that I've been there, and then evade your detection if you got any monitors or detections in place, right? So our concept is when we start deploying deception is we want to break that initial infection. Why? Because that initial infection is the front, that's the foot in the door. So we're showing you here. So once the user clicks, I get the infection, I call that patient 0. Once patient 0 gets infected, phones home, tells everybody I'm there, and then starts doing reconnaissance. As he does reconnaissance, he or she, don't want to just single out he, and once they're doing reconnaissance, they find another vulnerability. That's called lateral movement, right? They're moving laterally and they try to get privileged accounts and stuff like that. So the deception concept is to confuse them, confuse and frustrate them. So when they're trying to move laterally, they don't know if they're talking to a real machine or a ghost. And that's what we do, because all we have to do is break one step of the hacking methodology, and it's a win. Each time we can confuse or frustrate or slow down the hackers, gives us more time to respond, right? So we want them to start that process all over again, and that's why we shape-shift the network. We like to shape-shift the network and prevent them from doing different types of things. We set up decoy machines. Put a machine out there that should never receive a packet, all right? Put a machine that's already existing, put a couple of decoy ports on the machine and see if somebody talks to a machine bound to a port on a ghost. Decoy services, decoy networks. You can set up all kinds of decoy stuff. You know your network. The hacker doesn't. We just covered the actual process and methodology. They have to do that recon. They have to do that surveillance. These are all these things they have to do to be able to get information about your network. So put things in there that don't exist. to you, but they exist to them. But in your monitors, it exists in the point that, hey, somebody's talking to a decoy. If somebody's talking to a decoy, you've been breached. And that's patient 0. And as long as I prevent patient 0 from spreading to patient 1 through N, it's a win for defense. And that's what we have to do. All right. Any interaction, as I said, is a trigger. There's an intruder. Go to red alert. Go to the source, isolate the source at the switch or the segment boundary, and start marshaling your defenses. Better yet, spin up a bunch of fake machines. That's what we're working on now, where we can detect it. Once we detect it, we spin up 100 machines, and the attacker doesn't know these new machines have been spun up. And when they start reconning and moving around, they find different things. How do they know what's real? They don't. And I got empirical data coming up on that. So you can see some tools out there for you. Open source, we have very old from Fred Cohen. The Actual Deception Toolkit still works very well. You got Decept, DCEPT there that's on the slide. That's actually a honey token. So if anybody out there listening has heard about pass the hash attack, those types of things, gold ticket, silver ticket, those types of things, what you do with Decept is you create a user, so a token, because that's what these things are doing, they're dumping tokens, and that user is non-existent, so it's a honey token. So when they dump with Mimikatz, that's a popular hacking tool out there, when they dump with Mimikatz, when they dump that token should never be talked to. So you have an object ID detection of that token, critical alert, somebody's using Mimikatz or dumping the tokens of your Active Directory, for example. TrackX and the Symmetria just got bought out by somebody. So these are different commercial tools you can use as well, but you can do it yourself. So here's the data for you. Hacker halted 2018, right? What happened is the crew that was doing the capture the flag, the CTF, North Carolina had the big storm last year, so we were asked to, me and a friend of mine, and we got lucky because a friend of ours, Jamie, he had a server in the trunk of his car. He drove from Huntsville, Alabama to Atlanta with a server in the trunk of his car. Don't know why he did it, but we're glad he did it. And because of that, we set up a capture the flag. Now, when I built this capture the flag network, I put in deception and decoys, right? So I deployed it for 6 hours. No one could really figure out what was going on, including the just crowned world champions of the Global Cyber Olympics, who have won like 6 out of 7 years, right? The problem was I put in so many obstacles, it took them time to figure it out, and they couldn't figure out what was real and what was a ghost, right? They had to find the doors just to start. We set up multiple access points. We told them the actual DNS server and a little bit of information, but they had to find the right door. Like the show that used to have Let's Make a Deal, and you pick door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. They had to find it. Well, after 6 hours, we had to start giving a lot of help. Nobody could really traverse and find, and it was a complicated network, don't get me wrong, but that's why I wanted to do it. I wanted to show that we can do this. We can take control. We are in control. Why are we in control? Because we know our network. The hackers don't know our network. I've told you this over and over again. Don't listen to the vendors. Right? We know layer 3. The hacker does not know our layer 3. They got to get in and do recon and figure out our layer 3. So what we do is we control that. So when we control it, we look for traffic in layer 3 that talks to a ghost or a decoy. As soon as we see it, one packet. This is how we flip the model. One packet is all I need. I get one packet, critical alert, I got malware or I got an intruder on that segment. And that's the concept. Put it on your critical segments. Everybody says, well, Kevin, it's too hard. So I was doing the Cyber Defense Summit for the oil and gas industry probably 2 years ago, something like that. And somebody told me it was too hard to do. So I had somebody start a stopwatch, and I deployed 3 solutions, 2 of them open source, 1 commercial, in 6 minutes. All 3 solutions in 6 minutes, including doing an apt install of a tool from the internet in that 6 minutes. So it's not that hard. You already have all the monitoring in place anyway. You bought all those tools, you bought all those products, you paid all that money that adds up to the 80 billion for 2017, et cetera, et cetera. So just put your ghosts and your decoys in your monitors. Anything that has network traffic that's a ghost or decoy is malicious. That's the concept. Okay, I don't know if I got time for the demo. Let me get to the end and we'll find out. But I wanted to show you this. This is the network I created at Hacker Halted. So when you look at it here, they had to come in the black switch. The black switch was a 172.16.0.0/16. So they had to figure out all the stuff with that. And what you see there is the bottom three machines was Metasploitable. Some of you out there might have heard of it, deliberately vulnerable machine. Windows 7 that had the WannaCry vulnerability. Then an old Windows Server 2003 that had the MS08067 that I told you about. And then what's connected to that is those routers. And each one of those routers fed another network. So if you look over here on the right-hand side of the slide, I gave them a DNS server. So part of their scope of work, I gave them a DNS server. So once they dumped and figured out a way to get those DNS names, there was 3 DNS entries. There was www.ctf.local, which was real. There was dmz.ctf.local, which was a decoy. And there was bank.ctf.local, which was a decoy. So once they started figuring that out, they had to figure out which of those routers led to that network. And this is realistic. As a hacker, when I got in your network, I don't know which gateway routes which way. When I got 3 routers here, I got to figure out what's on the other side of that router. And each router had an access control list on it where you had to know source port scanning and stuff to get past that access control list. And they spent hours trying to figure all this out. But look at the red box there, almost a little offset from the center, but connected to the black switch. That was the decoys. So 91, IP address 21.91 to 253 were all decoys. So when they would scan, right, because anybody out there listening, the hacking methodology, your recon, is trying to find live systems. So when they would scan, that's exactly what they would pick up, these decoys. And they'd have 50 targets, 60 targets, 70 targets. They never knew what to do. In fact, it confused and frustrated them so much, nobody took out those easy boxes, the Metasploitable, the Windows 7, and the Server 2003, because they were so much noise with all of them trying to figure out what was real and not real, it brought them to their knees until we finally gave them all hints. That's why I wanted to show you these things do work. Future, we're going to use artificial intelligence. This is the Movidius chip from Intel. I don't know how many people have used it. We've already worked with some researchers. Trellis is one of the research that's been done, and it uses the R language. There's actually a data scientist that figured this out. And using the R language, we can process up to 1 million to 2 million IDS, IPS alerts and use AI to try to normalize it, because anybody out there knows that's a nightmare. So that's a challenge as well. And like I said, one of our goals for the future is we will detect the intruder by the techniques I just talked about, patient 0, and we'll spin up and we'll do what's called dynamic host configuration protocol. Most of you probably heard of DHCP. Well, there's an area in the packet where we're trying to put up dynamic host configuration countermeasure protocol, DHCP. And what we're doing is we're taking the area in the packet and doing what I call the shape shift of the network. And the shape shift of the network is, think about it, if every day you drive to work or drive somewhere and you stop at a stoplight or a stop sign, and there's a left turn, there's a right turn, and there's a straight, that's normal. Next day, we shape shift it. You get to the stoplight or the stop sign, you got a left turn, you got a right turn, but you can't go straight. Next day, we shape shift it again. You get to that stoplight or the stop sign, you got no left turn, you got no straight. The only thing you can do is right. The only thing you can do is a right turn, and guess what? That's our route, and that's why this works, because we can force you to take the route that you want to take. And I mean, we want you to take, and that's kind of what Symmetria does with their tool called Maze Runner. So we'll do that. And Paul, do I have time to do the demo, or I'm not sure? I'll put that up while we're waiting to see if I got time to do the demo.
Yes, you do. Go ahead, please.
All right, so let me show you real quick. So it's not a long demo. It's 1:49 seconds. Now, this is Network Security Toolkit. I'm doing this because it's really easy to set up Snort. I actually spoke at Black Hat on this. You could actually set up Snort in 2 clicks of the mouse. So that was kind of cool. So I like it for that reason. It's really, like I said, the easiest way that I've ever seen to set up Snort. So what I'm going to do here is I got it running on a sensor. And right there, if you look at it, that is the actual rule. So I'm putting in a rule here. That's a Snort rule. Alert on any IP traffic from any source address, any port to this destination. This is a layer 4 honeypot because I've taken an existing machine on my network and I've opened a port on it. And in this case, you see it's 445. Why? because I know if somebody gets on the net, they're always going to look for 445. That's what hackers like to do, because how Microsoft does all their local area network. This is actually a Unix machine. I think I even did it on an actual virtual machine, not exactly, I don't remember for sure. And what I did is I just opened port 445. So now all I need is any interaction with that IP address and that port combination, the IP address bound to the port, and I get a critical alert on my SIM or whatever environment you're doing your monitoring, and it comes up and says layer 4 trigger malware on segment. And that's the concept. And that's what I'm going to do here. All right. So as I do this, you'll see I go here, I got netcat listed at a 445, and there it is. Layer 4 trigger malware on the segment. All right. And that's kind of the process of how you do it. It's that easy. So anytime anything interacts with that port, as you're going to see here, I'm going to do it again. Telnet, just a simple telnet, just a touch, one packet. Remember, this is the main beauty of this. All I need is one packet, and that's the power. And you see over here, it's scrolling. I'll click over there here in a minute. And when I click over there, you see, there it is. Layer 4 trigger malware on the segment. That's a layer 4 malware. And you can open ports with anything. I'm just using netcat as an example here. You can also open ports with the application itself and enable it and just not have the application configured. I do that with telnet on Cisco routers sometimes because that's a juicy looking thing, but it's a honeyport. All right. So now here what I'm going to do is, and again, any interaction you see, and we show you the malware. And that's kind of the process. This is a layer 4, because a lot of clients tell me, well, we can't put any other machines on our network, so that's a layer 4. But I also have another one I can do, which is a layer 3. So now I'm doing actual ping, and this is the La Brea tar pit. So this is what I set up the ghosts with at Hacker Halted. So when you see here, every one of these pings that La Brea responds to is a ghost. And that's why we control our network. And here I can set up exclusion addresses. I can do all kinds of configuration in the La Brea configuration file. And that's pretty much it. That's a layer 3 demonstration of a decoy at the end there. And that's a layer 4 that was at the beginning of the video.
We are Starweaver. Education you can bank on. For more information, contact us.